before we get started, what are you doing this Saturday afternoon? I have something really great to invite you to. Come to the Italian Center in Stamford this Saturday, October 28th from 4 to 7 p.m. Joe Heschmeyer from Catholic Answers is coming to give a talk on the Eucharist, and we're going to have food, drinks, fun, and fellowship. And you're invited to join us for this Oktoberfest. So grab a ticket, bring your friends, bring your family, bring your kids, bring your neighbor, bring your coworker, bring everybody. This Saturday, October 28th. For tickets, go to veritascatholic.com and click on the Events tab. All right, today on Let Me Be Frank, His Excellency is joined by Joseph Pearce, the very excellent expert on literature and the faith, and the founder of the website jpearce.co. They're going to have a great conversation about literature and narratives and what that can do for our faith. So stay here at 1350 AM or 103.9 FM or on the Veritas app on your phone. The app is available at the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store, or veritascatholic.com. And if you enjoy Let Me Be Frank, you can help us out by going to your favorite podcast platform and giving us a 5-star rating. Let Me Be Frank is brought to you by a grant from Foundations in Faith. Foundations in Faith embraces innovative approaches to funding pastoral care programs in the Diocese of Bridgeport. Resources focus on energizing lifelong faith formation and discipleship and fostering a commitment to justice and accompaniment with our most vulnerable. From seminarians to retired priests, from baptism to last rites, from suburbs to inner cities, the reach is broad and the impact is meaningful. For more information, visit them on the web at foundationsinfaith.org. Okay, here we go. This is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. I'm Steve Lee, and it is my great pleasure, as always, to introduce Bishop Frank Caggiano.
Steve, nice to see you, as always, my friend.
Yeah. Yes, Excellency. Yep. It's always great to catch up with you and see you.
Yeah, and we have a great guest today.
This is going to be a treat.
Yeah.
Very much a treat.
Tell us who it is.
Yes. Okay. Coming to the show, Joseph Pearce. And once he begins talking, you may or may not be able to tell, but Joseph grew up in England. And he is really a foremost expert on English literature. He's written many books, including The Quest for Shakespeare, Tolkien, Man and Myth, The Unmasking of Oscar Wilde, C.S. Lewis and the Catholic Church, and many others. Last summer, I read a book that Joseph wrote. It was a biography of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which was just fantastic. So, and he's written a very helpful book for folks who are less literate like me, called 12 Great Books, and so many more. Joseph is a regular fixture on EWTN, Ave Maria, here on Veritas, and as a lecturer at major colleges and universities in the US, Canada, Britain, Europe, Africa, and South America. I could go on, but I'm going to stop there and simply say, Joseph Pearce, thank you for coming and welcome to Let Me Be Frank.
It's an honor to be on.
Yeah, I'm delighted that you are that you're on the podcast, because you bring a wealth of experience and perspective that, quite frankly, many of our guests have not had to date. So this is a great venue to kind of mine together. But Joseph, like I ask all my guests, give us a sense of your life journey, particularly your faith journey, and how you got to be where you are today.
So yes, so this will be the short sort of 2-minute version of a book I wrote that was called Race with the Devil, My Journey from Racial Hatred to Rational Love. So as that subtitle would indicate, that when, as a young man, in fact as a teenager at the age of 15 years old, I got involved with white supremacist politics back in my homeland of England. And rose through the ranks of the movement, and edited a magazine that led to my being sent to prison twice for hate crimes. So I was very anti-Catholic. I was involved with the anti-Catholic terrorist organisations in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. I was a member of the Orange Order, which is an anti-Catholic secret society. So I was very anti-Catholic. I was a racist. I was a very long way from Christ and His church, and it was obviously to God be the glory. So all this is under grace. It's all gift. But under grace, I owe my conversion more than anyone, more than anything, to being introduced to the works of G.K. Chesterton. And the key thing about being introduced to Chesterton, who was really sort of leading me to Thomas Aquinas, was that I was always raised to think you had to choose between being religious or being rational. You couldn't be both. So you be religious by abandoning reason, or you can be rational by abandoning religion. And of course, Chesterton showed me that fides et ratio, that faith and reason were actually indissolubly married. And once I realized that reason led to a belief in the existence of God, I was on that journey. And I say I have Chesterton to thank under grace for my journey to eventually becoming a Catholic. And I was received into the church in 1989 when I was 28 years old.
So from your perspective, to see the odyssey that you have walked is astounding, that grace can move you in such a way, right? You're the living example that God is alive and his grace is powerful, right?
Yes, Your Excellency. One thing I hope is that because I was so far away from Christ and his church, and indeed so antagonistic to the church, that I'm hoping that my journey will show that nobody is so far from the grace of God that they can't find their way to him. And we all have friends, or I mean, perhaps ourselves, but we certainly all have friends and people we know that have wandered far away from Christ and his church. But I hope my story will be an encouragement that no one's beyond the reach of his grace.
Of course, absolutely. I wonder those who were your colleagues in your pre-conversion life, when they look at you now, I wonder what they think. If there could that be me one day? I just wonder to myself, huh?
Yeah, there's the whole spectrum actually, from those who consider me to be a traitor to the cause of white supremacism, to those who have also converted and have contacted me, maybe thanking me for my own example on that, or maybe they made their own way there independently and they just discovered that I also was a Catholic and just wanted to touch base with me.
So others have also gone through the journey. That's fascinating. Wow.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. It's to your point. The love of God finds no bounds, right? There is no place we could hide that God will not be present to us. That's amazing. Wow, it's amazing. So your love is for literature, correct?
Yes, I mean, I've loved literature all of my life. My father was very keen on literature in general, Shakespeare in particular. He could quote swathes of Shakespeare from memory. So I sort of grew up with the best of English literature from my father's knee, so to speak. But of course, once I became a Catholic, I realized that so many of these writers were leading us to Christ and his church through the power of beauty and through the power of narrative. And I think that's, Jesus Christ himself, of course, teaches us some of the most powerful lessons through the telling of fictional narratives. I mean, his parables are stories that convey a great deal of truth, although they're not historical. So I think that's the power of literature to bring people to Christ.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Well, of course, Steve and I've spoken a great deal about the power of beauty and how beauty is an evangelizing power that unfortunately in contemporary world has not been really utilized or appreciated much, right? The fact that you're highlighting it and your entire career has highlighted this is a great gift, because I think it opens a door that most people will find fascinating, right? Once they enter into it. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, I think that the beauty is always a beacon of God's presence, and that when the great Greek philosophers who talked about the good, the true, and the beautiful, and these were triune. And I really believe that when Jesus Christ said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he was saying, "I am the good, the true, and the beautiful." So it's the love, charity, that's the good, reason, ratio or logos, right? That's the true. But the life in things is beauty, both the life in the thing beheld, but we have to have life in ourselves, right, to actually see the beauty in other things. So in this day and age where relativism has confused what's meant by love, has confused what's meant by reason, beauty, if anything, is more powerful than ever as an evangelizing weapon.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. You have converted me. I absolutely agree. So now you used the phrase rational love. So to explain to our listeners, what do you mean by that phrase, rational love?
Well, it's the Christian understanding of love is absolutely indissolubly wedded to the idea of reason. For Christian understanding of love is to freely choose to lay down our lives for the beloved, even if the beloved is our enemy. Now, so what for the world, love is an emotion, it's a feeling, and therefore irrational. But for the Christian, it's this free choice of ourselves to sacrifice ourselves for another. Now, we're obviously the feelings got to change. The feelings we have towards our spouse, or our children, or our parents, or our friends, or our enemies are going to vary greatly. But that's ultimately accidental and irrelevant. What's necessary is the rational choice to sacrifice ourselves for another. That's why love, in the Christian understanding of the words, is always rational.
And that was your journey in life, to understand that in your own life, right?
Yes, indeed, exactly. To understand that the connection between faith and reason, but also between love and reason.
Yeah, see, Joseph, we've been talking a lot about the need for apologetics in the church and helping people to understand. Like, I think the average Catholic wrestles with that very question about the relationship between reason and faith, or science and reason, or however you wanted to characterize the dichotomy. And they fall into the trap of thinking, well, one at best exists, that is religion and faith, because the other hasn't caught up yet to answer every question that we have, right? Which is not true. As exactly as you said so well, it's not true. So so how can the study of literature help to illustrate that then? Right? Because you have thousands of years of writing, correct? But it's so explain why literature is such an important venue then for this question.
Well, first of all, as you're quite correct, Your Excellency. We have 3,000 years of heritage here.
Mm-hmm.
1,000 years before the coming of Christ, where writers such as Homer and Sophocles and Virgil were grappling with these moral issues and basically moving in the right direction. And then since then, of course, the age of Christendom, for 2,000 years, we've had these wonderful works of Christian literature. And what I say about literature is it holds up a mystical mirror to us. A physical mirror can only show us our physical surface, right? It's sort of like a metaphor for philosophical materialism. It can only show us physical matter. It can't show us anything else. Whereas literature is like a mystical mirror that we can look into it and see not merely our physical selves, but our metaphysical selves. So including, our memory, our desire, our loves, our hates, so the fullness of who we are as human persons. And then beyond that, it can also show us not just who we are as human persons, but who we should be. In other words, more like Christ, and who we shouldn't be. Right? Basically swallowed up by pride, by selfishness. So literature has this power to show us who we are and who we should be and who we shouldn't be. And in that sense, it's a very powerful way of coming to understand ourselves and our neighbor.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, of pre-Christian literature, like some of the authors, and there are others as well, do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I think probably that's a very good question, actually, Your Excellency. I love Homer, but I also love Sophocles, just with Homer, let's just say that the Iliad teaches us a lesson that the pride precedes the fall. Right at the beginning of that epic, we're told by Homer that sing of the pride, so sing of the anger of Achilles and its destructiveness and the will of Zeus, which is accomplished. So obviously, Homer, living 800 years before Christ, did not have the revelation of the true God. But what he did understand is that pride leads to anger. Anger is destructive of both our friends, our enemies, and ourselves, and that somehow providence is played out in this. I mean, that's a very powerful lesson for us to learn. So, yeah, I think that what C.S. Lewis said about the Greeks. He says that they are like the virgins awaiting the coming of the bridegroom. And he talks about neo-pagans as divorcees who have walked away from the marriage. So I think it's very important for us to see the difference between the virgin muse of, say, Homer and Sophocles, the seeking the truth and waiting for the bridegroom, and the modern neo-pagan who've turned their back on Christ and are basically moving forward in a position in sort of skepticism and cynicism.
That's a tremendous image. I had never really thought of it in those terms, but that makes perfect sense because Homer and Virgil and all the rest, they did the best. I'm putting this in a pedestrian way, but they did the best they could with the lights they had to reach the truth as best they could. Meanwhile, we would have the fullness of the truth, and you walk away from it, and then it's your fault. I mean, you are the one who was actively denying what ultimately is the culture and the accumulated insight of thousands of years. That's a fascinating way of looking at it. You know, when I was in high school, I was the last in my high school to have only Greek 4 years. So I remember the Odyssey. We had to prepare 5,000 lines of Greek. And the chair of the classics department of Princeton came for a 2-hour public session. That was the scariest 2 hours of my entire life. And we were allowed no dictionary, just the lines. Gosh, I thought to myself, oh my God. But why do I say all this? It's because my Greek teacher, Father Kelly, God rest his soul, Jesuit, he said, you know, to consider that the great tales, these great epics, were basically oral tradition for hundreds of years. You know, we marvel as, you know, contemporary humanity, we're all sophisticated. He said, who do you know would be able to memorize that and sing it and then pass it on to their children and children? And we think we're all sophisticated, right? It's fascinating when you look at literature, even in that context. It's amazing. In some ways, we've progressed. In some ways, we have gone backwards in some ways as a culture. Would you agree with that, or am I being too pessimistic here?
No, you're absolutely correct. In fact, I keep coming back to C.S. Lewis. So first of all, C.S. Lewis, I think getting this idea largely from Chesterton, and particularly Chesterton's book, The Everlasting Man, talked about chronological snobbery. In other words, this sort of looking down our supercilious noses at the past on the presumption that the modern and the new is always superior to the old. And that's basically, it's an arrogance which is similar to racism, because it's assuming that someone's inferior to you merely because they're different, in this case, because they're in the past. And the other thing you said, Your Excellency, again, to go back to Lewis again, in one of his books, The Pilgrim's Regress, he has this character, allegorical character of Father History, representing history itself and knowledge of history. And he says that, you know, in the past, that the God's people, the Jews, were the only people who knew how to read. Everyone else had forgotten how to read. All the Gentiles had forgotten how to read, as in read the law, you know, to understand the covenant, to have this relationship with God. The Gentiles had lost that. But he said that God did not desert the Gentiles because they were now illiterate theologically. He said instead he sent them pictures because they couldn't read. He sent them pictures. So this idea of, you know, the epics of Homer being a way by which, like stained glass windows, those who can't read are led towards the bridegroom, led towards the coming of Christ.
Right. So now Chesterton obviously has had a huge impact on your life. So for the sake of our listeners who say, well, who is this Chet? Like, who is this man? Like, what background can you give? Because maybe someone's listening who may be ripe for the moment of impact, of grace, just as you had in your life. So what can you tell us about him?
Well, so G.K. Chesterton was a writer who was active from the 1900 when he was first published until 1936 when he died. During that period of time, he was a man of letters, but in other words, he didn't restrict himself to one particular type of literature. So he was a great essayist, short story writer, poet, novelist. He wrote biographies of St. Francis of Assisi and St. Thomas Aquinas and others. But he had this great use of paradox, you know, and it pushes following Christ here. You know, so the greatest paradox ever, perhaps, is the first shall be last and the last shall be first, which is the very secret of love, right? That to love, you have to put yourself last in order to be first in the kingdom of heaven, so to speak. So this idea of giving yourself to another. But, you know, Chesterton sort of was very much a one who used paradox, the apparent contradiction that points to a deeper truth. And it was that understanding of he made me sort of think, stand on my head, see things the other way around through this art of paradox. But the key thing about him was that he's a convert to the faith himself. And so he wrote many books showing how the Catholic Church was rational and reasonable. Perhaps most importantly, his book Orthodoxy published in 1908, and his book The Everlasting Man, published in 1926, I think. So he led me to an understanding that faith was rational, and he led me to Thomas Aquinas, because that's really Thomas Chesterton had this Thomistic understanding of reality, and he had a very, very good way of explaining it in an easier language than, so shall we say, heavy philosophy. So he allows us to get into these deepest truths of the Catholic faith within a very accessible and indeed entertaining way. He's a very entertaining writer, full of good humor, as well as good reason.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. There are some great lines, Chesterton. He had great wit about him, right? In a sense, the way you're describing it, if St. Thomas is the theologian, Chesterton was the catechist. He made the theology accessible to people.
Yes, and he did it. You're quite right. I talk about Chesterton in terms of humor and humility. He had both in abundance, and wit and wisdom. He had both of those in abundance, and he used his wit to convey wisdom, and that's a very captivating way of doing it, because if wisdom can be presented to us in a way which is making us smile or laugh or entertaining us, then we want more of it. You're going to come back for more. But if you present wisdom in a really abstract, dry, arid fashion, you can only take so much at one time, if indeed you have an appetite for much of it at all.
Yeah, that was true. Oh, absolutely. We're going to have here in the diocese in April a presentation from a professor in Notre Dame who specializes in social media and communication. And one of the theories that's circulating in many different areas, including with this gentleman, is that social media has changed the way we communicate, meaning instead of having a narrative that's written, that's very linear, now it's much more a question of storytelling, right? An image, which you alluded to. So you mentioned narrative before and the power of narrative. So could you explain that a bit more? Is this the age where we should be telling the stories of faith to each other as a way to evangelize?
Absolutely, it's crucial that we do so, and we know this from Christ himself. How does God reveal his deepest mysteries and deepest truths to us? He does it through narrative. First of all, the narrative, which is history itself. I say that history is his story, and his entering into the story through the incarnation has been called in the Hollywood movie the greatest story ever told, and that is the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the greatest story ever told. It's as Tolkien and Lewis said, the true myth, the true story, where the power of story becomes truth and fact. But within that story, when Christ becomes incarnate, he tells us most valuable lessons through the telling of stories. The parable of the prodigal son, for instance, these fictional narratives that convey great truths about realities. This is the way that Christ himself reveals the greatest truths to us. It's much more accessible to us and digestible for us if truth is presented to us as a narrative rather than as an abstract proposition.
Which would be a surprise to some people who consider that you pass on the faith by studying the catechism, which I'm not debating. I think you need to study the catechism. That's not the point. But the point is, it's the stories that make it actually infleshed, right? It's the narratives that make it infleshed in a person's life and relatable, right? Or applicable. Let's put it that way. Yeah, that's interesting. Before we go to break, you kept mentioning Tolkien. You mentioned now Tolkien. I love Tolkien. I have to say, everybody knows that. Anybody who knows me and even tangentially knows, I think Tolkien is just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Now, having said that, do you agree?
Father, my heart leapt when I heard you speaking so enthusiastically about J.R.R. Tolkien. To me, he's one of the great geniuses of all time as a storyteller, but also as a Catholic. He was a profoundly knowledgeable Catholic about his faith and had a way of conveying that through the power of story, which has captivated millions and brought millions closer to Christ.
And I must confess, for those who, like for the younger generation who may not initially read his books, some of the films that have been created are not completely faithful to what he wrote, but nonetheless gives a venue into what I think is just an astounding Christian imagination, right?
Yeah. Tolkien said that, and I'm quoting him word for word here, The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. And that's something we have to know and be aware of as we approach his stories.
Yeah. Oh no, and you have to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to see that. I mean, in many ways. In
I
fact,
agree.
I've mentioned this before, but when I was young, when I was introduced to Tolkien in high school again by the Jesuits, and I read the trilogy every summer until I went to seminary. Then in seminary, everything else was going on. There were so many other things to do. But now periodically, I because of so many things, such busyness, I will peek 20 minutes worth of one of the films that was created just to kind of get like the adrenaline going. And C.S. Lewis,
Again, well, Tolkien and Lewis were great friends. Lewis actually has Tolkien to thank. Tolkien and Chesterton were major influences upon Lewis's conversion to Christianity. And if it hadn't been for the influence of those two men, it's possible that Lewis may not have converted to Christianity. And if he hadn't done, of course, we wouldn't have these wonderful works that Lewis has also given us. Another great mind of the 20th century who's led many, many people to Christ.
Yeah, oh, without a doubt. Yeah, no, without a doubt. Screw tape letters. Gosh, it was like yesterday I read them for the first time. Yeah. I think we have a break and then we'll be back. Yes, Steve?
Yeah, definitely. Screw tape letters is so convicting to read. So I can't wait to hear the next part of this conversation. This is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. His Excellency is speaking with Joseph Pearce, an expert on literature and the faith, and the founder of the website jpearce.co. And we will be right back after the break.
If you're concerned about your end-of-life plans, searching for a Catholic cemetery, or have loved ones who are buried in one of the 14 Catholic cemeteries throughout Fairfield County, now might be a good time to begin planning for yourself or for other family members. Call one of our family advisors at 203-742-1450 and select option 5 to leave a message, or visit www.ctcemeteries.org. Many people don't realize that they can be buried with their deceased loved ones, even if all of the family's in-ground plots have been taken. The Diocese of Bridgeport Catholic Cemeteries provides in-ground burials, as well as columbarium and mausoleum options. This makes it possible to unite your family together in the same cemetery, and it's an opportunity to build a bridge for your family back to the church. Talking about this issue is not easy, but pre-need planning makes your wishes clear, reduces cost, and helps your family avoid difficult decisions at a time of grief and loss. You can start your planning now by contacting one of our family advisors at 203-742-1450 and select option 5, or visit www.ctcemeteries.org. We can guide you through the options, regulations, and considerations to help you make the best decisions for your family. The number is 203-742-1450 and select option 5, or visit www.ctcemeteries.org.
Okay, welcome back to Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. His Excellency is speaking with Joseph Pearce, and I'll just turn it right over to.
Yeah, Joseph, you had mentioned when we were on break about the way we could unlock this as a way of evangelizing people and just introducing them to the power of the seventh gift of the Holy Spirit, which is wonder and awe. When you stand before the majesty, the greatness, the incomprehensibility of God, and yet it doesn't consume you; it just embraces you, it caresses you. Then you feel you belong in the universe. You know that there's a God who's moving forward. That's not just a cognitive reality. It's not. It's more than that. And literature and art and music just profoundly does that. I think we're long overdue to do that. It's interesting. Just this morning, in fact, we're planning. We have this great initiative called The One, and it's giving people opportunities to encounter Christ in truth, beauty, and goodness, and what all of that can open up with. And we're planning book clubs, and just be able to have like a person like yourself and other people who are expert be able to perhaps make 4 or 5 videos that introduce the thought of C.S. Lewis or Tolkien or whoever it may be. right? Chesterton, and then have a reading list and have trained facilitators just open it up to people and let them explore and just let them go with it, because I think that's the match for the hay. That's the match that's going to, in different lives, just let it go. Does that make sense? Is that crazy? Is that
No, it's absolutely what's necessary is that we have all this wealth of literary and artistic power at our disposal. That as Hilaire Belloc said, the past is ours. That we and as Chesterton said, that the Catholic Church is the one continuous institution that's been thinking about thinking for 2,000 years. We have this wealth at our disposal, and we should be employing it. And certainly the power of beauty, the power of narrative. I sometimes talk about the five metaphysical senses. So we know what our five physical
Mhm.
senses are, but for me, the five metaphysical senses they go in order. So it begins with humility, and then humility gives us a sense of gratitude. Gratitude opens the eyes in wonder. And it's only when our eyes are open in wonder that we move to contemplation. And it's only when we move to contemplation that we experience what Thomas Aquinas calls dilatatio, dilation, the opening of the mind and soul into the fullness of reality. So we need to should we say, igniting this sense of wonder in order to actually see the goodness, truth, and beauty of the cosmos. If we don't do that, then we're prone to believe that the darkness prevails, and it absolutely doesn't.
right?
Because as
Right.
Samwise Gamgee says in one of the darkest moments of the Lord of the Rings, above all shadows rides the sun. But you can only say and see that above all shadows rides the sun if you look upwards. And you only look upwards if you've got this sense of wonder.
Mhm. The way you describe the five metaphysical senses, it would also seem to me that if you want to develop a true life of prayer, you need those senses. You need to go through that journey, right?
Yes, absolutely. Without it, I mean, literally, the pride, the sort of technical definition of pride is the absence of humility. And if you don't have humility, if you have pride, you will not have a sense of gratitude. If you don't have a sense of gratitude, instead of having your eyes open in wonder, they'll be shut in cynicism. And if your eyes are shut in cynicism, there is no contemplation. And there's no contemplation, there's no dilation. But on the contrary, and this is where Tolkien's so powerful again, what happens is we golomize ourselves, we shrivel and shrink into our own ego. The
Mm.
irony and the paradox is the bigger we think we are, actually the more shriveled and shrunken we're
Mm.
becoming.
What an interesting idea that what Gollum could represent. Isn't that fascinating? But that's a
Yeah, I think,
lecture in itself, right?
yeah,
That's just a lecture in
absolutely.
itself.
Absolutely. I think that's what Tolkien shows us. In The Lord of the Rings, the ring, I could explain this, but we probably don't have time. The ring is really a symbol and is synonymous with sin itself. So the wearing of the ring is the act of sin. Keeping the ring on is being in sin. But of course, if we don't wear the ring, we bear the ring. If we're ring bearers instead of ring wearers, we are be bearing the burden of sin without sinning. And that, in other words, we're carrying the cross. So the ring bearer is a cross bearer. And if we refuse that, if instead our sin is the precious, right, then we do Gollumize ourselves. We shrink and shrivel. And I think that the Tolkien has shown us in the character of Gollum, looking at ourselves in the mirror. If we are going to insist on living in pride and not in the humility, this is what we really look like.
You know, my nephew um, gave to me 2 Christmases ago a replica of the One Ring. And he also gave me a replica of Aragon's ring. And because he knows I love the trilogy, I love Tolkien. And from what I understand, they were very expensive. I mean, they're perfect replicas. And he said to me, "So you're going to try them on?" So I did put Aragon's ring on, but to this day, I will not put that ring on. I will not do it. And now you gave me the words. Why instinctively I cannot put that ring on. And now you just explained it. Wow, you're like my psychoanalyst. This is great, Joseph. It's tremendous. Okay, so you wrote a book 12 great books. Now, of those 12 books, which is the greatest of the great in your estimate? Is that an unfair question? It's an unfair question, right?
It's a difficult question, because, for instance, what I say about my favorite Shakespeare plays, sort of somewhat jokingly, but nonetheless truthfully, is that I can't make up my mind about which is my favorite Shakespeare play between Hamlet and King Lear. So I say that Hamlet's my favorite play on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and King Lear the weekends on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So it is obviously difficult to sort of pin.
Okay, so give us 2 or 3. Give us 2 or 3 of those 12s. Like if you were to say to me, okay, Bishop, if you have only time to read 3 of those 12, I would recommend you look at these 3. What would you suggest?
Okay, I would probably say I'm a Shakespeare lover. I would probably say King Lear and Hamlet. Why choose? And
Right.
Brideshead Revisited, because to me, Brideshead Revisited is the greatest novel of the 20th century. I would add, by the way, that The Lord of the Rings is not a novel; it's an epic. The Lord of the Rings has more in common with the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and Dante's Divine Comedy and Beowulf than it has with any novel. But The Brideshead Revisited, to me, is the best novel of the 20th century and profoundly Catholic. And just to give a taste, part 1 of Brideshead Revisited that ends symbolically on Good Friday with the removal of the Blessed Sacrament from the tabernacle. And it ends with symbolically on Easter Sunday with the return of the Blessed Sacrament to the tabernacle. So you have this liturgical symbolism in the background to the novel. And indeed, Brideshead, who's the brideshead? The bridegroom. So Evening Ward's got all of this Christological and liturgical symbolism going on in that wonderful novel, and I would certainly recommend that to anybody.
Really? One of the 12 is the Christmas is a Christmas Carol, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, which is a favorite. Obviously, it's been put into film many different ways. Why did that make the list of the 12?
Well, obviously, normally you'd think, well, some of the longer works by
Dickens.
Great Expectations, A Tale of Two Cities, these longer works, David Copperfield, you think surely these have more gravitas, right? Surely, by comparison, Christmas Story is more levitas than gravitas. But the reason I chose A Christmas Carol, not first of all, there's nothing wrong with levitas, but it's very much like a parable. It has the same sort of power as the parables of Christ. That's why the very character of Ebenezer Scrooge, you only have to say the name, and people have this image. So he has the same sort of power as the prodigal son. The prodigal son's a fictional character. Ebenezer Scrooge is a fictional character. But if you say the prodigal son, we all, have this image, very powerful image that applies to ourselves. We've all, in some sense, wandered away and have needed to come back. And with Ebenezer Scrooge, we all have this tendency to put ourselves first and not to give ourselves to others, to sort of, this is mine, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that the whole story, and of course, as a conversion story, I can't think of a better one, quite
Right,
frankly, than the
right,
conversion of Scrooge.
right, right. Well, absolutely. So that's that reference you mentioned at the very beginning of our time together, that mirror into your inner self. Right? It's very much we could all see ourselves at one time or another slipping into the Ebenezer Scrooge, right? That's fascinating. A picture of Dorian Gray. Now, why would that be on the 12, one of the 12? What do you
Well, again, I read a biography of Oscar Wilde called The Unmasking of Oscar Wilde. So I'm fascinated with him. Of course, he was a sinner, but he also had a lifelong love affair with the Catholic Church. He was an unfaithful lover, but when he was received into the church on his deathbed, that was the consummation of a lifelong love affair, for which we should be thankful. But the point is, most of his work, almost all of his work, is profoundly Catholic in its morality.
Mhm.
Even when Wilde himself was living an immoral life, and his art still reflected this Catholic moral vision. And nowhere more than in the picture of Dorian Gray, where basically, for those who don't know the story, Dorian Gray makes a pact with the devil at the beginning of the work, where the portrait of him will grow old and will reflect his sinfulness. whereas Dorian Gray, irrespective of what he does, will continue to look beautiful. So what we see with this picture of Dorian Gray, it's a mirror of his soul. It's a mirror of his conscience. And I don't know if I want to necessarily give away the end of the story. I don't want to be a spoiler. But what we see in the picture of Dorian Gray is really what great literature is, right? Great literature is a mirror that shows us ourselves. Tolkien says the stories hold up a mirror to man. They show us ourselves. And as I said earlier, it's a mystical mirror, right? It shows not just the surface, but the depth. And that's what the picture of Dorian Gray does. It shows how, doesn't matter how beautiful Dorian Gray looks, in reality, he's as ugly as the picture.
Right. Was Oscar Wilde, was he a Catholic? I don't remember.
He had a lifelong love affair with the church. He was raised as a Protestant.
Oh, he was a Christian. Okay.
Yeah, he almost became a Catholic as an undergraduate. He loved John Henry Newman and Cardinal Manning and Pope Pius IX, but because of his weakness and his sinful lifestyle, didn't actually consummate that love affair with the church until his deathbed.
But he was Christian. I should have asked the question, was he Christian? He was Christian.
Yeah, at his worst, he tried to escape from his own Christianity, but never really succeeded.
Right. Oh, yeah, because it's part of the genes in the end, right? In some way, shape, or form, it's part of the religious imagination we're formed with. And when people leave the church, I mean, they leave active worship, but I'm not sure you ever really do get it out of your system. And there's always hope, like you said, that God's love will call you back. Augustine made your list too, I suppose, right? In his Confessions.
He did. Augustine's Confessions. I mean, if you had to name sort of 5 or 6 classics of all time, I don't really see how you could leave Confessions off. First of all, it's the prototype for the whole genre of autobiography. It was some senses the first, but also, and this is a real testimony to its greatness, it was the first autobiography and probably the best. I can't think of any autobiography of anybody that's as sublime and as profound and as honest and as much and so theologically rich and brilliant as Augustine's Confession. So it's certainly one of the great works. So when you ask me, I don't know if you can't remember now, Your Excellency, if you asked me what was my favorite, what was the best, there's a different question, of course.
Yes, of course there is. Yes, there is. Yes.
Favorite is subjective, and I was answering you in a subjective way. If you asked me to answer objectively, it would be difficult to choose otherwise than Confessions.
Wow. Now, I must confess, one of the 12 books I have not read, The Man Who Was Thursday. I must confess, I've not. So what is it, and why did it make the list?
Well, it's a very strange book, and most people who read it for the first time, I would even venture to suggest that everybody who reads it for the first time is confused when they finish it.
Oh, really?
It's very surreal. So, in a nutshell, I could try to explain it. Basically, what Chesterton's best novel, and probably his best known novel. And basically, what he's showing us is a quest for God. But these are people that are in denial. These are anarchists who dislike God. But the whole idea is, if you're authentically seeking the truth, then the truth will be presented to you. And the key thing about it at the end is it's a meditation on the mystery of suffering. And so the tendency some of us have to say, well, because there's suffering, therefore there's not a loving God. And again, I don't want to give away the end of the novel, but what's revealed at the end of the novel is, on the contrary, we have a God not only that makes sense of the cosmos in terms of reason, but actually enters the cosmos and suffers with us and for us. It's almost as if what the novel is saying is that a distant, unsuffering God would be insufferable, but we don't have a distant, unsuffering God. We have a God who suffers with us and for us, and that makes all the difference in the world.
Right. Of course, the mystery of the incarnation it's literally there before us. So 12 made that book. So were there books that you struggled with and said, well, maybe I should put this one in as one of the 12? And so in other words, were there a couple that were left behind that if it was a book of 14, you would have included them? Like, are there any others out there?
Well, the thing is that it could have been 50, it could have been 100.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, there's an element. I think I would. The subtitle of the book is 12 well, there's 12 great books and get to know classic literature. It's not the 12 great books, right? So it's not a suggestion that these are the best 12. These are 12 great books that deserve to be in any list of great books. But I could easily have selected a different 12, and those other 12 would be as good as works of literature and as conveyors of goodness, truth, and beauty as the 12 I did select.
Yeah, well, that's excellent. That's excellent. So we have now in our diocese a number of schools that have a classical education, right? And they read the great books as a major pillar of their education. And I see you shaking your head, which people will not see, but I can see you as we're taping that you're in agreement. So you would be an advocate of like a more classical form of education for our youngsters?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the most encouraging things I've seen in recent years is the explosion of classical education across the spectrum, both in Catholic schools and in Protestant schools. And indeed, we have these charter schools now that are not denominational at all. But this classical education, classical model is really taking off. And it needs to, because what it really is a restoration of the canon of Western civilization, which has been neglected and lost over the last 50 or so years. Now, we talk about the canonized saints, those saints that are in the canon of those we know in heaven, but they're also canonized books, right? There's a literary canon, and these books are in that canon because they're tried and tested. That like a good wine, right? A great book speaks across the centuries and the generations. As C.S. Lewis says, fashions are always coming and going, but mostly going. All right. If something is up to date, it's going to be out of date. If something is following the zeitgeist and not the Heidegger Geist or the spirit of the age and not the Holy Spirit, it's going to be out of date. These works are never out of date because they are actually tapping into perennial, permanent things.
And in a classical education, then the books would be read. And then are they discussed? Are themes taken out of them? Are you aware? Like, would you have a sense of how this works for the classical education?
Well, there were different approaches. Obviously, the Socratic method is you engage the students by getting them to engage themselves. In other words, you have a discussion amongst the students about the work, and you try to bring their own thoughts out and into a forum. But there are various modes, or these are means to the end. The end ultimately is we want children to grow up with 3,000 years of experience.
Right.
And we don't want them to grow up so they know nothing about the rich heritage of the civilization of which they are part. Because if you don't root people, and this is what basically Chesterton talks about, the philosophy of the tree and the philosophy of the cloud. That basically, if we're not rooted in the perennial truths that we see in these great works, these great books, then we're like tumbleweeds, like clouds that are just blown away by whatever the fads and fashions of the age are, with no way of testing it against anything which is older and tried and tested.
Now, the next question may be, I'm certainly ignorant of the answer, so you could say anything, and I believe you. But for those authors who are alive now, are there individuals that you admire that are alive writing as we speak, books and stuff that people who are listening say, well, you know what, I'm interested in, and of course I've read some of these, but a contemporary author that I think is worth reading. Is there anyone out there that you would know of and recommend? Or
so there's two things I would say. First of all, that I do think that as regards something being canonized in terms of being a work of literature, it does need to have aged like a good wine. So, generally speaking, I say that we shouldn't talk about a book being in the canon to at least 50 years after it's published, and probably slightly longer than that. So The Lord of the Rings, for instance, was now published 65 years ago. I would have called that a great book 20 years ago because it was obviously so. But generally speaking, we have to be careful about canonizing work too soon because it has to prove the test of time. But on saying that, downstairs I have a library all over the house, so various different types of books in different parts of the house. But downstairs I have about 3 shelves, probably about 200 or 300 books of contemporary Catholic and good fiction in other words, from the last 25 years or so.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to make a point of reading these to keep up abreast of what's going on. So I can give you some names. Michael D. O'Brien, published by Ignatius Press. Father Elijah is probably his best known book. He's a great writer. Fiorella de Maria is a British writer she's written some wonderful books, again published by Ignatius Press. A bit more off the charts. Tim Powers, who's the New York Times best-selling author, a little bit weird and wacky, so I'm not giving absolute endorsement here. But he's a very devout Catholic and a good, solid, staunch Catholic, and that is present in his works. He's probably best known as the inspiration for the Pirates of the Caribbean films.
Is that right?
Yeah. So that's what gives some idea of sort of the weirdness of his book. But there's always, the virtuous characters ultimately are always triumphant, and the evil, particularly satanic evil, demonic evil, is seen as being such. There's no moral relativism in his works. So there's a little bit in it that I'm not. And this says I don't want people to say you asked me to read Tim Powers. No, I that's your choice.
Exactly. Well said. Exactly. Well, thank you for that. That's fascinating. The only other thing I was wondering, and again, I'm completely ignorant of this too. I mean, I've read some of the in Eastern literature, not Western literature. At seminary, we read the Bhagavad Gita and just in comparative religion, all the rest of it. But has any of that fascinated you in your career to delve into Eastern literature, or has it just always been like British Western literature?
Yeah, I mean, I made a decision, years ago that, I know that when I die, there will be dozens of books I wanted to write I haven't written, and hundreds of books I wanted to read I haven't read, and that's within the Western canon. So, if people have insights they can offer me from Eastern literature, I'm very pleased to receive it. But I want to focus, I've only
on the West.
The surface of Western civilization. I mean, that includes Russian writers like Dostoevsky and Solzhenitsyn. So there's plenty to be reading without my having to dabble in go too far east, so to speak. But I'm not saying other people shouldn't. But I know what I want to focus on. I've only got a few years left. I'm going to keep looking at the finishing line here.
Well, listen, from the bookshelves I see from back there, you've done a great job of reading. My goodness. Well, Joseph, thank you. Well, you're you've led a remarkable life, and you're doing remarkable work. And I'm just grateful that you spent the time with me today and our listeners.
Your Excellency, I mean, it's a joy for me to spend time with you, and it really is encouraging to me to know that we have leaders of the church such as yourself. We need that inspiration at the top that we can follow. Well,
thank you. Thank you. That's very kind. And one day, maybe I will invite you to come to the diocese if you have some time, to give a series of talks. Or I think the people of the diocese would welcome you with open arms, and myself too. Yeah,
I would love that. It'd be good to have the opportunity to meet you in the flesh.
Oh, good. I'm just writing it down so I don't forget. Okay.
While you're writing that down, Excellency, I'll say we're going to take one more break now. We'll come back on the other side with a listener question. This is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. His Excellency has been having an excellent conversation with Joseph Pearce, and we'll be right back.
Hey, this is Matt Sparazza from The Tangent. Each week on The Tangent, my co-host, Father Sam Kachuba, and I go on tangents to show how intertwined the Catholic faith and our culture really are. With guests like Scott Hahn, Dr. Greg Pitaro, Kristalina Everett, and so many more, The Tangent is always entertaining and informative. Check us out on Fridays at 12:30 on 103.9 FM, 1350 AM, anytime on the Veritas app, or wherever you get your podcasts. God bless.
Welcome back to Let Me Be Frank with Bishop Frank Caggiano. Okay, Excellency. Here's the listener question that came in this week.
Mhm.
Simply asks, what do the 4 symbols for the 4 evangelists signify? And is there a significance in why they were chosen to represent them?
The second part of the question, I really do not know. There was perhaps like a choice made. I think this evolved over time, but it's biblically rooted. And there are different. I did some homework to try to answer this question, and there's no unanimity as to why these symbols were chosen and what they mean. Right. So, with all that as a disclaimer, this is what I came up with. All right. So the symbol for Matthew, which is the first of the 4 Gospels, at least in the order in the Bible, is a winged man or a winged angel. And the commentators I read said that if you look at the narrative in St. Matthew's Gospel, from the genealogy to the incarnation, it is an affirmation, basically what you mentioned, Joseph, of the importance of reason in the enterprise of salvation, that humanity is important, right? So that's one. Mark is the winged lion. So you think courage, you think monarchy, and of course in Mark, it's the kingship of Christ and the coming of the kingdom that is the clear theme. For Luke, who's my favorite, is the winged ox. I always have sympathy with oxes or bulls. Right? And what do you think of a bull? You think of sacrifice, you think of service, you think of perseverance and strength. And that's one of the themes in St. Luke's Gospel, right? Particularly of the Lord, the sacrifice of his life. Now, the one what caught me by surprise is John. Now, John, the symbol is the eagle. Now, Christian scholars, there was a time in the church where the eagle was believed to be the only creature on earth who could look directly into the sun. And because of that, John, of the 4 evangelists, could look deep within the mystery of the incarnation. You just think of the prologue. And therefore, he is the one who's given the symbol of the eagle. Fascinating, no?
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so if you have a question for Bishop Frank, send it in on social media, or you can email questions@veritascatholic.com. Bishop Frank Caggiano is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So is Veritas Catholic Network. And we'd like to thank our sponsor, Foundations in Faith. A grant from the St. Therese Fund for Evangelization makes it possible for us to bring Let Me Be Frank to you. Foundations in Faith is committed to supporting and transforming pastoral ministries in the Diocese of Bridgeport, and you can learn more about their outstanding work at foundationsinfaith.org. And Joseph Pearce, thank you so much for joining us. What a fascinating, insightful conversation that was.
Mm-hmm. So now, Joseph, tell us your website, where if people want to come to learn more about, where would they go?
So you want to keep up with what I'm doing, just go to my personal website, which is jpearce.co. So that's jpearce.co.
CO, not COM, CO.
Correct.
Great. Excellent. Excellent.
So then before we go, Excellency, would you please give us your blessing?
Certainly. We'll pray together today. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Joseph, it was a real pleasure. Thank you. Steve, it's always good to see you, my friend.
Awesome. Great conversation. Thank you, Joseph. Thanks, Excellency.
All the best.
Thank you.